philosophy, from my perspective at least, we cannot understand Plato unless we think about what a good life is. For Plato, philosophy is not just an enterprise that you do by yourself and it's just the work of the mind. But if philosophy doesn't do anything to you, if it doesn't help your life, if it doesn't increase the goodness of your life, then it's almost for nothing. Just imagine, for example, there's a saying in Romanian, a massage to a wooden leg. If philosophy is just an enterprise for having fun, then it's really a massage to a wooden leg because it doesn't do anything. You know, you can massage a wooden leg as many times as you want. The wooden leg will not feel better. So, for Plato, the main question that probably is behind the whole philosophy is, what is the good life? And the obvious answer is, well, a good life is an excellent life, or a virtuous life. And you have both words here, excellent life and virtuous life, because in Greek, the word for a virtuous life is arete, which is also excellent life. For the Greeks, excellence and, or let me put it this way, for the Greeks, virtue does not have the meaning that it has for us. It's not necessarily only about morality. Anything can have a virtuous life. Even a knife can have a virtuous life. The life of a virtuous knife is to cut well, because that's its virtue or its excellence. If a knife does not cut well, then it's not a virtuous knife, or it's not an excellent knife. So, if indeed the good life is an excellent life, then clearly the question becomes from him, well, what is excellence? Or what is virtue? And as I mentioned before, each thing has its own virtue. Even a knife can have a virtue. Even this video should have a virtue, but it doesn't have any. But nevertheless, which is true sometimes, you know. We have to consider, especially if we think about the human being, what is the excellence of a human being, because that's the problem that we have right now. If we think about what a good life is for a human being, we have to clearly understand what is a human being. As otherwise, we will not be able to understand what an excellent life for a human being would be. We have to know what a knife does, for example, or what a knife is, in order to say that the good life of a knife is to cut well. So we have to understand what is a human being in order to realize what is the good life for a human being. Once we ask what a human being, we have to see whether there is any kind of composition, or we have to see whether the human being is just a natural being organized in a certain way, or perhaps it has a combination between soul and body. And as you may know, if you looked over the readings, you may know already that Plato talks about both the soul and body. But if that's the case, we have to see what is the excellence for each one of them. If we want to know what the excellence for a body is, we usually go to doctors or to trainers. We go to the gym and so on, and they may tell us what we, or to people who talk about nutrition. So they will tell us what we have to eat, they will tell us how we have to behave, they will tell us what we have to do when we have a disease and so on. But what do we do whenever our soul has problems? Or what do we do whenever we try to understand what is the excellence for a human soul? To whom do we go? Well, this question becomes, well, what are the genuine teacher of virtue, or excellence? Again, but we talk about the excellence of a soul, right? Remember, I said before that if we talk about the body, we go to doctors, we go to gymnasts, we go to trainers, we go to nutritionists, but we do not necessarily know exactly to whom we go if we talk about the soul. If you read the Protagoras, you will see that Socrates tells Hippocrates at the beginning, be careful what you do, because what you're engaging into whenever you're looking for a teacher of virtue or a teacher of excellence for the soul is a very dangerous business. Because you put your soul in the hands of someone, and the moment you take your soul and put it in the hands of someone, that soul can be modeled the way the other person models it. And what goes in the soul stays in the soul. What goes in the body can come out. So you eat bad food, you go to the restroom and then you're going to resolve the problem. But if you eat bad food for the soul, you will not resolve the problem very fast. So even now I have to be very careful what I'm saying so I don't put anything bad into your souls, because you will stay there in principle. So we have to really be careful whenever we choose the teachers of excellence. And Plato, in all his dialogues, talk about various possible or various teachers of virtue, or various people who can claim that they are teachers of virtue. And usually there are three categories. Tragedians, the people who wrote the plays, the tragedies and the comedies and so on, the sophists, and the philosophers. You have here Plato, one possible philosopher, and you have here Sophocles. They look the same, so you can only actually really choose to whom to go if you only look at them. But the moment you try to choose, you try to see what each one of them do. What I will do today, I will talk mainly about the sophist and the philosopher, because in Protagoras, that's the main distinction. What the sophist does to your soul and what the philosopher does to your soul. And that is two ways of education. So, in all of those dialogues that we read actually from Plato, this is a huge problem. The distinction between what it is to be a sophistic education and what it is a Socratic or a philosophical education. In sophistic education, the main feature of sophistic education is that the master or the mentor, the teacher, claims that he or she has knowledge. Whenever you choose a teacher like that, you choose him because you want to have that knowledge. Or, in other ways, you want to become what that person is. As long as I have a certain knowledge of something, and you want to have the knowledge as I have it, in a certain way, you want to become what I am, if it makes sense. The idea is, of course, that I have an object, me the teacher, and I can transfer that object, knowledge I have, into the minds of my students. If you consider it this way, that at the beginning of sophistical education, two people come into communication. The result is not two people, but one. The mentor remains what he is. The disciple or the student becomes the mentor himself. That is the main ideal. I want to be a sophist. I want to be able to speak in public the same way the sophists speak in public about any kind of topics. I want to be able to have the knowledge the sophists claim to have. So I'm going to pay lots of money to these teachers because I want to become like them. It's production of clothes in a certain way. In Socratic education, though, things are completely different, mainly because, as you know by now, Socrates, for example, says all the time that the only thing he knows is that he does not know anything. Well, if I do not know anything, I have nothing to transfer to you. So if anyone comes into connection with me Socrates right now, that person does not come in order to communicate with me so he can take, or he or she can take from me the knowledge I have, because I have nothing. So in Socratic education, the ideal is not to become like the teacher. But rather, what happens is that me, the student, perceives in the master or perceives in the mentor a certain love. A love for something that is beyond himself. Wisdom, in principle. Philosophy being love of wisdom. And I enter into communication with the one who loves wisdom because I love the same thing. I do not enter into communication because I love what my teacher has. As in the case of sophisticated education, I do not enter into communication with an engineer because I want to become an engineer too. And I want to have the knowledge the engineer has. But rather, I enter into communication with Socrates because I love the same object that he loves. And that object becomes a tree, as he will put it, I think, in the Phaedrus, that provides the shadow in which I can grow within freedom. Socratic education, at least the way Plato presents it, and he may be biased, of course, or at least the way in which I understand Plato presenting it, is an education towards freedom. It's not towards determination. You determine the disciple, so you take his soul within the space of your freedom, and you determine that soul towards something that is outside of you. In sophisticated education, you determine the disciple towards something that you know in advance. You know what you want him or her to become. In Socratic education, you do not know what he or she will become, but you only know that he will be, as he is right now only in potentiality, a lover of wisdom. But the love of wisdom will be expressed in his or her own personality. If, again, in sophisticated education, you have two people coming into interaction, the result is one, obviously numerically two, but you still remain one because you are the same with the teacher. In Socratic education, two people coming into communication and the result is a third, if I can put it this way. Because the disciple is no longer what he was when he came into the communication at the beginning, but he's no longer his mentor either. He goes beyond his master. He becomes actually himself. What happens in the Protagoras at the beginning, when Socrates is telling Hippocrates, be careful where you go, because you will put your soul into the hands of someone, and you will, and once you put your soul into someone's hands, you do not know exactly what happens to you. Is this distinction between sophisticated education and Socratic education? You always have to remember, according to Socrates, that the moment you put your hand into your soul, into the hands of a sophist, then you will be transformed according to what the sophist was, or transformed according to the being of the sophist himself. Yeah. If, however, you put your soul in the hands of a philosopher, the promise